if you get pulled over for a traffic stop, if you get pulled over for speeding, if you get pulled over for having a headlight out, that local sheriff, that statey can run your name through that database, and it could ping, for a post you made. It could ping for an ideological statement that you have that got you placed on that list.
The FBI office that runs the terrorist watch list wants an AI system to predict who might commit a crime before they do it. Not what they've done, but what an algorithm guesses they might do. And it's happening exactly as the watch list quietly pivots from Islamist terrorism to domestic dissent to, quote, anti-capitalism, anti-Christianity, and hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family. It's Minority Report, except the precogs are a language model, and the future criminals are anti-fascists, journalists, and Zohran Mamdani. This comes amidst a growing crackdown by the Trump administration on the U.S. left, the anti-communism summit, the Cuba report accusing progressive organizations and individuals of being foreign agents for criticizing U.S. policy, the attack that this media outlet you're watching right now is enduring. Our next guest broke this story. Daniel Boguslaw is an investigative reporter covering national security and surveillance. He writes the Deeper States newsletter, and he got these procurement documents from the FBI itself, which he wrote about for Reason. Daniel, welcome to Breakthrough News Live.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on and really appreciate your work here. It's so important what you uncovered. Let's start with the documents. What exactly is the FBI asking vendors to build, and what tipped you off that this was about predicting people, not just like crunching data faster?
Sure. Well, what I got my hands on is a request for information. They're basically looking for different people to submit preliminary materials, laying out what a AI injection into the FBI's watch listing center would look like. They have a number of criteria for how this technology is supposed to function, the different elements, and as I said in my piece, the Threat Screening Center, previously known as the Terrorist Screening Center, is by its very nature a pre-crime entity. It is a list of approximately 2 million names, which are flagged historically for alleged ties to Islamic terrorism, perceived Islamic terrorism, but which reporting has borne out is increasingly being turned on U.S. citizens. That list used to be comprised of only 7,000 to 8,000 U.S. citizens. It's now sounding like that number of actual citizens is starting to balloon. But what this technology is stated for in this procurement document is a literal predictive capability. So you're adding a artificial intelligence predictive capability onto a list of hundreds of thousands of people who are already being screened for their perceived potential to be a criminal actor. Now, I just want to add one piece of detail here about how this actually works. I think a lot of people, defenders of this watch list, historically going back to 9/11, which was the catalyst for its creation, will say, well, if you're not committing any crimes, then you have nothing to hide. But what we know now, as this watch list is increasingly being politicized under NSPM 7, the presidential order criminalizing all sorts of speech and political affiliation, is that if you get pulled over for a traffic stop, if you get pulled over for speeding, if you get pulled over for having a headlight out, that local sheriff, that statey can run your name through that database, and it could ping for a post you made. It could ping for an ideological statement that you have that got you placed on that list. So, this is not just an ambiguous concern with civil liberties. This is not an ambiguous libertarian stance. This is about something that is accelerating right now under presidential directives that could have an impact on totally normal, average, everyday American citizens.
Well, I mean, I think it's really important that you point that out, because when it happened during, post 9/11 war on terror, people said it's not going to end here. And this is obviously going to be used in the way that we see it being used now. And as you rightly point out, it's not going to end. It's not going to just stop with targeting people on the left. And in your reporting, there is a foreign nexus trick running through this. The Anti-Fascist Bail Fund, Rubio's report naming Ilhan Omar, Mamdani, even Ben and Jerry's. Here's a State Department official calling for a pre-crime approach to far-left, in quotes, terrorists.
As outlined in the United States counterterrorism strategy, we currently are addressing 3 major types of terror groups: narco-terrorists, Islamic or jihadi terrorists, and far-left terrorists. For all 3, we need to identify terror actors and plots before they happen.
So they use this in reference to foreign groups, but explain, how does slapping this label of, terrorists on a foreign group become a backdoor to watchlisting American citizens?
Yeah, so I think it's most useful to think of every member of any of these groups, or even people who are not even part of these groups, but are connected via text message, via email, via Facebook group with someone who's potentially a member of one of these groups. All of a sudden, that huge nodular web becomes a catalyst for domestic surveillance because, as we know, under Section 702, this is the Foreign Surveillance Act loophole, which basically allows for federal law and intelligence agencies to sweep up the communications of U.S. citizens under the pretense of spying on foreign non-U.S. persons. So with these foreign terrorist organization designations, again, you can imagine whether it's the raft of lists that was released in Marco Rubio's Cuba report, whether it's the 4 foreign terrorist organizations tied to Antifa that were designated in 2025, including groups in Germany and Greece, 1, 2, 3, 4th string connections, right, to these groups all of a sudden become authorized targets for U.S. surveillance. And any of those people who may have communicated with Americans are now having all of those communications swept up. So, this so-called foreign nexus is an extremely powerful tool for swooping up Americans and potentially getting them on the watch list. One thing that I also cited in the Reason article, which I had reported earlier, is the fact that the National Counterterrorism Center, which is sort of tasked with formulating watch listing and potential threats on terrorist organizations, has at some point been investigating something called the International Antifa Defense Fund, which is, a extraordinarily small scale organization for the legal defense of left-wing radical defendants. But that was sort of the only international body that they could even try to find. Nonetheless, you could imagine, anyone who's potentially visited that website, anyone who's donated money to this legal defense fund, could potentially be flagged under, material support statutes for, supporting terrorism. So, there is a huge effort underway to expand the watch list, to utilize its power to criminalize and surveil domestic dissent. And again, as you mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation, the warning lights have been going off since this was first created, since Bush created Homeland Security Presidential Memorandum 6, I think, which tried to bring together all the different watch lists in one place. And people have said, in the ensuing decades, fine, they're targeting, Muslims in mosques now, but soon they're going to come for you. And I think a lot of people on both sides ignored that warning, and now the truth is that it's here for everyone.
Yeah, it is indeed here for everybody, but obviously there's an emphasis on certain people. But I want to play, so there's FBI Director Kash Patel has been openly bragging that every major tech company in the world is embedded in the FBI in building all of this. I want to play a clip of Kash Patel speaking to Sean Hannity about AI.
I've got every major tech company in the world embedded in the FBI, rebuilding our internet capabilities, our classified systems, and the ability for artificial intelligence to be in our counterterrorism program so we can get instantaneous results. What's the point of collecting terabytes of data if you can't sift through it?
I mean, so there you have it. This watch list you mentioned is already, I think you said it was near 2 million names, if I'm not mistaken. And then as you note
Right,
in your
but
piece, oh, sorry, go ahead. What do you want to clarify with that?
no, yeah, I mean, the last count we know is close to 2 million. But I just wanted to point
Crazy.
out about what he's saying with this
Mhm.
AI application, which is that, look, we know that the pre-crime approach does not work, and the reason we know that is because even without AI, we know that the Boston Marathon bomber on the terrorist watch list. Okay, the Pulse nightclub shooter on the terrorist watch list. People who showed up at the Capitol who'd been watch listed for years. None of those were stopped. And so the fundamental premise of pre-crime is, okay, well, we couldn't perfect it without AI, but now when we inject AI into it, now we're really going to be able to get to the bottom of it. And it's a basic misunderstanding about the reality that we live in. I mean, there's a famous quote from a former CIA director who said the only person who knows everything inside of every compartmented classified information system in the CIA is God. And quite frankly, the same can be true for who's going to commit the next mass shooting. I mean,
Right.
this is not a rational way to go about making our society safer. And in fact, anyone who's used ChatGPT or Claude knows that AI is extraordinarily fallible and is probably going to throw out all kinds of insane targeting suggestions. So, the Bureau, all domestic intelligence and law enforcement agencies have always had this massive problem where they're collecting far more intelligence on people than they can even sift through. But the notion that AI is going to be able to solve that problem is laughable. I think it's just going to put a lot more innocent people in their crosshairs.
So then, okay, I'm glad you touched on that, because if it didn't benefit to have like these watch lists to stop something like you mentioned, the Boston bombers, I think the Pulse nightclub shooter as well was on a watch list and still got missed. So if it's a broken system in catching or predicting these actual violent acts, what's the honest purpose of supercharging this list with AI? Is it just a misunderstanding, or is there something else behind it? And you kind of touched on this before, but can you elaborate a bit? I think it's really important because for someone who thinks a watch list would never touch them, like, I'm not on the left, I'm not, I'm not even Muslim. Like, why would why should this person care?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'll just say that anytime the federal intelligence or law enforcement agencies gain new power, that power is directed at the perceived enemies of whatever administration, whatever political party is in power. So this is really not a partisan issue simply about Donald Trump and NSPM 7. It's an issue of creating a precedent for a huge dragnet for these organizations to go after people. Now, if we take the example of NSPM 7, this lists, again, things like anti-Americanism. It lists things like anti-traditional family values, which could be construed to mean any number of things. But it also tries to categorize these things under statutes which could be persecuted for material support of terrorism. And since Bush first created this heuristic for prosecuting support of terrorists, the definition of material support has been greatly expanded to include things like advice, to include things like legal support. So, I mean, you could be someone who's never even heard of any of these left-wing organizations that are listed, who, wrote a comment on a blog or tweeted something out that fits into one of these categories, and you could end up on that list. So again, this is a massive dragnet that really can be applied to almost any speech that marginally crosses the political beliefs of the sitting administration.
And the war on terror and this watch list that was created at that point, it was quite bipartisan. Now this administration is making it clear that it sees run-of-the-mill Democrats. Let's remember Karen Bass was mentioned in that Cuba report, obviously a little different than this, but they consider them to be, radical left-wing extremists. So are any members of Congress pushing back on this?
I mean, I think certainly the ones who were named in that report have been, but I still think that there's been a real abdication on the parts of our elected leaders to push these agencies into surrendering information about what they're actually doing, about the scale of this effort. I mean, I'm sorry, the excuse of, oh, it's classified isn't cutting it anymore. When you're talking about criminalizing the speech of like we're talking about like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, saying that it's classified and these agencies aren't going to play ball with you. That's not cutting it. And that's not true. That's BS. Even if these people are getting classified briefings, there's a way to communicate that to their constituents and to the American public in a unclassified summary. And, they're just not interested in doing it. And maybe this list of naming names is going to change that. But I haven't really seen that so far, if I'm being honest.
Well, let's hope they all check out your report again at Reason Minority Report. FBI seeks AI for political watch list. And I also want to remind everybody that you write the Deeper States newsletter, which they can also go check out. Daniel, thank you so much for your reporting on this. We really appreciate you having you on.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.